Good morning and welcome to the Community Catalyst webinar series. We're going to go ahead and wait just a few minutes as more guests continue to join us. As you're joining our webinar series today, please enter your name in the chat, the university that you're affiliated with or organization, and what passion and position do you have associated with the Extension service? And you'll want to make sure that you click to respond in the chat to panelists and attendees so everyone can see. Excellent. If you're just joining us, we're doing a little bit of housekeeping and encouraging people to introduce themselves in chat by entering your name, the university or organization that you're affiliated with, and what position or passion do you have associated with the Extension service. And we'll go ahead and begin in just one more minute. All right, welcome. My name is Lindsay Shirley, and I have the pleasure of serving as Associate Provost and Associate Director for Oregon State University Extension Service. Today, we're going to be sharing with you the first of 6 webinars that will focus on different topics associated with data-driven discovery. So as you're introducing yourself in the chat box, make sure to incorporate your university or organization that you're affiliated with, also your passion and position with the Extension service or how you connect with the Extension service. And we're going to go ahead and start with a little bit of a poll to see what things are on your mind as we're dealing with a lot of differing experiences and situations across the United States and the American territories. So this poll, think about, given current circumstances and challenges, which of the following elements present the greatest opportunity in your work as an extension professional? So you can choose 1, 2, or all of these options. Engaging community stakeholders to identify issues, building partnerships with communities and content experts, providing data insight for decision makers, sharing learnings to drive positive change, and supporting communities and taking the next step towards addressing issues. So we've got pretty consistent across all of the above is winning though. So we're about 77%. Excellent, thank you. And we'll keep looking into this as we move forward throughout the webinar series. So here are the results. You can see all of the above. So we've got a lot of work to do. So let's get started. It is my distinguished pleasure to introduce you to 2 panelists today, to introduce you to the process associated with community-driven discovery, let's see if I've got too many things popping up here. Community learning through data-driven discovery. First, Dr. Sallie Keller is an endowed distinguished professor in biocomplexity and the director of Social and Decision Analytics Division within the Biocomplexity Institute and Initiative at the University of Virginia. And she is also a professor of public health sciences. She is a leading voice in creating the science of all data and advancing this research across disciplines to benefit society. Recently, she has been called a trailblazing statistician, and she's been elected to the National Academy of Engineering. Congratulations, Sallie. Joining Dr. Keller is Dr. Mike Lambur, Associate Director for Program Development for Virginia Cooperative Extension. Dr. Lambur is a leader across the Extension Network in evaluation and research related to the effectiveness of programs, specifically evaluating how effectively programs serve the educational and informational needs of communities. He has made a significant contribution to the body of knowledge focused on the why and how of extension. Together, Drs. Keller and Lambur will be taking us on a journey through the process of community learning for data-driven discovery. It is an honor to bring this session and the Community Catalyst experience to each of you across the United States and the American territory. So on the next slide, you'll see where we're headed. We have 6 trainings for you, and they'll all be recorded, and we will also be building self-paced experiences for you to dive even deeper into this information. And you'll also notice that this training has been made possible by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Drs. Keller and Lambur.
So Lindsay, thank you so much. And we can go to the next slide, and Mike and I can share a vision that we've actually had for a number of years. Mike and I started working together on this journey with this vision about 3 years ago from Virginia Tech. Actually, at the time I was part of Virginia Tech. And we came together because my research group had started to work with local communities and local governments around data science, helping to bring data science insights to them to support the improvement of quality of life where, you know, we all live, learn, work, and play. And I was frequently challenged with, how do you scale this? If you work with one community, you work with one community. How do you possibly scale this engagement of data science with communities and their needs? And that led me to Mike and to the whole Cooperative Extension Network, recognizing and being schooled by Mike and others that there's this incredible workforce out in the field in every county in our country and territory in our country that actually spends their career trying to work with communities, whether that's a geographically defined community, such as a township, county, or city, or a neighborhood, or a topically defined community, the 4-H, co-ops, fisheries, farm operators. And there's this whole workforce that's out there day in, day out working with these communities. And so the challenge was, well, how could we actually marry that up and marry them up, all of you, the professionals out there, with this emerging field of data science to bring data in service of the public good to these communities to actually help in accelerating the work that you're capable of doing with the communities. So we like to think about this as evolving the next generation of cooperative extension capable of partnering with their local community stakeholders and with a deeper data-driven approach, sort of a data science reach back to our universities, just like you have topical reach backs in other areas. And even further, can we move beyond, you know, cool dashboards and different data nuggets that people throw at you and actually see if our cooperative extension colleagues can be the catalyst for mobilizing what we call the last data mile, of getting these data insights into the hands of the communities they serve in ways that it will actually move their lives forward. We're really fortunate, as Lindsay mentioned, that we landed a grant from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and we've had a 3-state team, Oregon, Iowa, and Virginia, working together to push this vision forward over the last 12 to 18 months. And what you're seeing through these catalyst sessions is an outcome of our activities together, sharing some of what we've been able to do in our own states with our partners, and then trying to spread the know-how out to a broader community and begin to work with folks across the country around what we call community learning through data-driven discovery. So with that kind of background of why we're here, let me start and tell you what we mean by community learning through data-driven discovery. So we can go to the next slide. So what you see here is our drawing of the process over the time that we've been working together, and through this really significant partnership with Cooperative Extension professionals in our states. There's been a process that's emerged, and it's actually a process of processes. And we call it community learning through data-driven discovery process. And we think of it very much as a continuous learning process. And the learning that's taking place is around data and data insights connected very specifically to issues that are bubbling up in the communities. And in this particular figure, what we see are 3 wheels, and if we had this animated, they'd be rolling around because they're not stationary, they're dynamic, and each part of the wheels touches every other part of the other wheels at different points in time. But it starts with the outer wheel, where it's an engagement with your communities to actually try to understand what the issues are and allow issues to emerge. Those of you who have worked in the field will be very comfortable with this idea that, and you've learned through your hard work over the years, that presupposing what issues a community has is just not helpful for anyone. You really need to let the people in the communities that you're working with surface the issues and things that they need to work on. You know, what keeps them up at night, and how can we help them learn about these issues in ways that they could perhaps create, or you could perhaps with them create new programs, new policies, be successful in getting different grants and other types of activities that will really help move the whole community forward. So this outside wheel is this sort of continuous communication throughout the entire process. The second wheel is what we like to think about as the data-driven learning component of this process. And this is where things perhaps differ a little bit from the types of ways that you've perhaps worked with your communities in the past, because this is where we're going to marry in data integration, data insights, taking data to action, being able to use evidence and data to actually measure and evaluate the actions taken, redirect resources. And I like to think about that white line between the 2 wheels as a frontier, and that's the frontier of continuous communication. When you're working with me and my folks, when Mike is working with me, you know, I'm that data scientist. I'm running around that wheel. They are the discover data, integrate data, act wheel. And I can't just run around that by my own and be useful. I have to be able to communicate with Mike. I have to be able to communicate with the stakeholders so I can direct my efforts in really useful ways. And then at the very center of the process, we have our data science framework. And that's really important because we have to be sure that all of this work around data and data insights and data discovery is being anchored in rigorous theory and methods coming out of the data science world today. I'm going to pause, and I'm going to ask Mike if he wants to give his perspective at all from your places in the wheel.
Sure. You know, again, I see those 2 wheels as sort of how we operationalize that data science framework in a real world context with that continuous interaction between the data science type people, such as yourself, Sallie, and others, and that colored wheel, that second wheel, and the outer wheel, which, you know, may be more of the extension sort of focus on that. So again, and it's you'll see in the examples, you know, oftentimes, you know, in our process in Virginia, we look at existing data, but we don't look at it in ways, in these very creative and very useful and informative ways that we have, you know, when we try to enhance that, which to me is what we're sort of doing in this as well. We're looking at data, but we're looking at it in new ways. And, you know, it's interesting too, you know, my background is evaluation, and I just talked about this on Monday in another presentation. And I said, you know, my definition of evaluation for 35 years has been a process for bringing information to bear on decisions about programs. That's CLD3. I mean, that really is what we're doing on a continuous basis, again, with the notion that we're bringing in stakeholders and we're working with them very integrally. And, you know, we are bringing this different sort of data science approach to that. So it just continues to evolve. Again, there's not a real starting point and ending point, but it's something that is very informative. And I think you'll see in the examples that it really allows us to look at situations in new ways.
Thank you, Mike. And I wanted to spend just a couple minutes talking about the data science framework that sits at the center of this, because this really is a piece that makes this process fundamentally unique by marrying together data science with the types of processes that those of you in the field working with communities have used for a long time. So the data science framework, the picture that you see here is actually a framework that forms the foundation of data science problem solving generally. Whether I'm doing this with physicists to look at different factors of the universe, or whether I'm using data science to work with cooperative extension and local communities to understand quality of life type of problems. But what I want to do is to put it in a little bit of context for the CLD3 process, because it is at the heart of that process. And it mirrors the CLD3 process in very natural ways. It starts with problem identification, that there needs to be questions that we want to answer. Otherwise, data science has nothing to bring. You can't bring data forward without problems and questions to answer. You know, what's the issue? What's the issue? And then it's important that we take those issues and try to frame them in a data context, and that we bring forward working hypotheses and questions, and that those are informed through the literature and through the, you know, both the peer-reviewed literature and the gray literature. And in fact, that we do our homework, we talk to each other, we talk to our colleagues in other areas to try to see who else has worked similar issues and bring that information forward. Once we're able to frame this problem in a data context, and you'll see again examples of that, that's what helps guide this data discovery process. And there's a training in 2 weeks on data discovery that you're going to find very exciting, where one is able to just really look under every rock for existing pieces of information that might be useful to help inform this problem. And there's a lot of stuff out there that we just don't even imagine when we start out in a problem. And once we've gone through that data discovery process, this is really the point in time where that partnering with the data scientists becomes really important, because then we're able to go out and actually acquire this data, ingest it, employ governance as needed to the data. If we're working with local data that has some sensitivity and privacy issues, we have to ensure a data governance structure. And then, you know, the wonderful task of wrangling that data, putting it together, and pushing it forward into different statistical modeling and analyses to build the insights. And then, just like the outside wheel of CLD3, we have communication and dissemination that touches every step of this process. And that's continuously going on with the team and with the stakeholders. And here the stakeholders are our community stakeholders, our cooperative extension colleagues, our subject matter researchers, our data scientists, all this, there's a whole ecosystem of stakeholders out there. And a lot of communication has to take place so that we stay on the same page. And then also incredibly important is on the right side of this figure is the ethics review. And ethics touches every piece of this process as well. Should we even be doing this problem is a good place to start when you're thinking of ethics. What biases do we introduce in the different data sources that we're bringing forward? That's a very popular conversation today in the media and other places. And our modeling choices somehow biasing different segments of our community in ways that we don't really want to have happen, and even our dissemination strategies. So ethics touches all of that. I like to think of this framework as a scaffold that allows us to create transparent documentation of the entire process, and hence the entire CLD3 process, so that others could replicate the work, others could build on it in a similar way. And we find this foundation has been helpful in accelerating the work of our teams together. So with that background, what we thought we would do is to just walk you through some examples. We have 3 examples today, and the examples are actually of communities that are geographically defined. But I do want to underscore again that the concept of community and community learning through data-driven discovery is very general and could be other kinds of communities that are social communities in different ways. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike or Lindsay. Lindsay looks like she wants to jump in.
Yeah, we do have a question that has popped in from the introduction. So can you clarify the type of data and sources that are eligible for data discovery process? For example, where, how does qualitative data and data mining non-numerical sources of information fit in the process?
That's a wonderful question, and we are agnostic on data sources. We will take data of all sorts if it can have some bearing on the problem. And from a data science perspective, qualitative data can be extremely rich, and we have ways to use natural language processing and other techniques, machine learning techniques, to try to pull context out of that data. And we're very fortunate that many of the people that we work with, particularly through Cooperative Extension, are extremely well trained in qualitative research methods. So we're able to use those methods in eliciting more information around the entire process and how useful it is in informing what we're doing. I don't think that we have, we don't have a specific qualitative data example in our set of examples today from a data perspective, but you will see many points in the process where that qualitative elicitation and feedback has played a principal role. And then quantitative data sources, local, state, federal sources, local social media, things on the web, Census Bureau, state departments of everything, local administrative data, all of that is completely fair game to consider.
Thank you.
Okay. If you can move the slides ahead. Again, we're going to, as Sallie said, we're going to provide 3 examples, and you'll notice, you'll see that the CLD3 wheel or the CLD3 circles, you'll notice those appear in some of these slides. That'll give you a sense of sort of where we're at with respect to what we're talking about in these examples. So I want to start with Giles County, Virginia. If you go to the next slide. Giles County is located just a little bit west of here. I'm in Blacksburg, Virginia. In fact, I play golf in Giles County quite frequently. It's a relatively small county population-wise, and you can see there some of the other demographics about that. And these, again, I believe were pre-COVID. So if you go to the next slide, one of the things that they discovered when they began looking at this was, the county government 2015 realized that almost 61% of their budget was going to reactive services. And reactive services are the results of their calls or contacts to the county government. They typically demand some type of immediate reaction or immediate response, such as breaking and entering, domestic abuse, animal control, and maybe even child care investigations. So basically what they did was they decided, well, let's take a look at this. And these are reactive services. Is there any way that we can sort of maybe begin to address some of this more proactively? But first of all, we have to understand what's going on. And so they teamed up with local government, with Cooperative Extension professionals, and some also community stakeholders. And the first thing they asked was, well, which of these services are being utilized? And you can see there the sources of information for, where those services were being utilized. And you can see it was from the general court, the community service, a day report, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a while. But a big piece of that were 911 calls, as well as Department of Social Services calls. And again, so to get that data, they had to cooperate with other agencies and to pull that data together to better understand what was going on. And then again, you can see over in the right-hand corner, so where we're at in those circles. And here we're in a data discovery mode. So what they decided to do once they got this information was they decided to look at it from a spatial perspective. In other words, where were these calls coming from and what were the nature of these calls? Thank you. And they generated this map. And I know you can't see specifically what some of those findings are on the upper left, but again, what was sort of very surprising to them was that they discovered, and what they were able to do was to convert these services to dollar figures in terms of what it was costing. And you can see there the findings were that they discovered that 1% of the locations were utilizing a quarter of the services or the funding for those services, as well as you can see the others. 5% were responsible for 55%, and 10% were responsible for 71% of the funding. And the notion was, gosh, how do we get ahead of this? Is there any way that we can be a little bit more proactive with respect to how we address some of these reactive services? And again, you can see on the wheel where we're at in that. So if you go to the next slide, so again, they identified clusters where they thought perhaps some positive change could occur, again, if they altered how they address these reactive services. And if you go to the next slide, there were some actually pretty amazing results. And again, they created a program called FOCUS, so the acronym FOCUS, a focus on families utilizing services. And again, think of it as this geographic data-driven service intervention. And again, you can see on the wheel where we're at on that. So let me just give you fill in some detail here on these results. The Day Report Center is an alternative sentencing program for nonviolent crimes, and they found that they reduced recidivism by 31% as a response of people going through that program. For the inmate work program, that allows individuals to pay their court costs through community service. And they found that they increased the annual number of hours of people doing that by 15,000. This was in the 2 years since they did this analysis. With respect to the TANF program, and for those not familiar, the TANF program is a temporary assistance for needy families. And again, they found volunteers and jobs and education for those families, and they actually reduced the number of families in that program by 44%. In terms of that summer youth program, again, that provides 6-week paid positions. It matches jobs to the interest of students between 16 and 19. You can see there that they had over 50 students and over 90 businesses got involved in that summer, and that was just a summer program as well. In terms of enhancing pre-kindergarten education, they encourage families to use pre-K opportunities like Head Start, Virginia Preschool Initiative, Early Head Start program. And again, they continue to add more slots to accommodate more children to that. And then the last outcome, where they had this access to community college program, where it provides the financial means for any Giles County student who graduates from high school to attend the New River Valley Community College, which is in Giles County, at no tuition cost to the students. And they had 81 new students enrolled in that second year of that program. So you can see that there were some pretty outstanding, I think, results. But here's sort of the rest of the story, and perhaps you can help with this, Sallie, because I didn't learn this just till a couple of days ago. But they did see a decline in reactive services, and in fact, it was so drastic when they remapped it that they thought that there must be a mistake. Somebody must have made a mistake with respect to how they analyzed the data. So they brought in somebody, an outside consultant, to remap that data, and they found out it was correct, that they had reduced the number of reactive services by such an extent that, again, they thought it was a data mistake. So I think you can see just some outstanding results, again, of taking a look at existing data and looking at it in new ways to be a little bit more proactive to some of the services that this particular county delivered. Sallie, do you want to say anything about that? You're on mute. Sallie, you're on mute.
Yeah, I think you nailed it, Mike. And you know that the wonderful thing about this example is that there was no new money needed for the focus program. It's just a reallocation of effort and funds, and now they're able to continue to use their data to guide their programs and their activities in their communities. So it's a great, just one of my favorite examples.
I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, so let's go. We're going to move a little bit now to a little bit to the east, to the Roanoke Valley, Allegheny County region. So next slide, please. So a little bit of background about this area. It's actually multiple counties. And so we're covering a population of a little over 300,000, 2,300 square miles, pre-COVID unemployment rate of 2.5%, predominantly white population. And the span of areas that it covers is both urban and rural. So what happened here was, and this was where we actually put together a team of some of our researchers with Cooperative Extension colleagues and also the Roanoke Valley Allegheny County Regional Commission. And the commission in particular were the stakeholders here. And they were wrestling with this issue about attractiveness to their community. Although at the beginning, that's not exactly how they characterized it. What they noticed was that despite there's multiple universities in the area, that the young scholars weren't necessarily staying in the region. And also there were jobs in the region that people didn't seem to be taking. It's like they weren't quite in the right part of the region or something for where the people were living. They just didn't really understand all of this. So that was sort of the issue that they raised. And so our first step, go to the next slide, was to work with them to see how do we frame this issue more in a data context so that we could try to take advantage of the community learning through data-driven discovery process. And so to do that, we sat down, and so this is where eliciting more information from the team becomes really important. So we sat down with folks from the commission and other stakeholders, and go to the next slide, please. And we developed what we call a data map. And this is a very popular step in the process where you take the question that you have and you start to ask yourself and ask the team and the subject matter experts, what are the components and parts of this problem that I can write down, draw a picture, and start to characterize in such a way that it's going to allow me to begin to think about data sources that I might be able to attach to this problem and to this figure. Now, when you do this, the figure will look different for every problem. And in this particular case, so we were interested in what's really driving this behavior that they're seeing in the labor force. And so the team decided with the commission that there were external labor force factors, and those are on the left, things that are challenges around the workforce, drug use, prisoner reentry, childcare costs, and the like. There were issues, again, internal to the workforce, around training, are certifications available, these college graduates that we know are there. And then on the right-hand side of this picture, there were external factors that affect the workforce. And these are just the community metrics, just how nice is it? You know, are there parks? Can you walk? Is there public transportation? What about commuting? How attractive can that be, or how complicated can that be in this region? And these factors and forces sort of come together. And what you see in the center is that you've got the region, which the cities and counties are embedded in the region. Households are embedded in the counties. The labor force comes out of the households. You've got the industry availability and the workforce development all playing. So now I actually have a map. And from the data side, I can now begin to envision different data and pieces of information that might exist that I can actually attach to this map that's going to help me pull together the picture for this particular team. And so if we go to the next slide, so that data map informs what we call the data discovery process itself. And so we've worked together to create the data map, and then we work together more to actually start to talk about, from your perspective, whoever you are, what data might be out there? What data could you dream about if you could have any information at all? What data would you like to have that's connected to that data map and is going to help inform this problem? And we call that the data discovery process. And the picture on the right is actually a teaser, because in about 2 weeks, if you join us again, we'll actually go into some details on how the data discovery process works in practice and how fun it can be. And so we go through this data discovery process. And in this particular problem, we did that. And then we took the data that we discovered, we went through the data wrangling process, and we began to put it together to create some initial data insights. And here's just a little bit of a snapshot of some of what we found. We learned about the high school graduation rates that stays pretty constant over time. And although you can't read the fine print on this slide unless you blow it up, what you would notice is that there's multiple places that these data are coming from. American Community Service, the Department of Education, some from local data sources and information. We found out about the employers. The population isn't changing too much. Things like obesity seems to be constant and a persistent problem in the area. So this gave us a little bit of background. Then the next slide actually gives you even deeper information into what's going on. So this is some data discovery around place-based data. So in this particular case, what we were actually looking at was information around the location of things like bus stops, transportation routes. Were they located, were they located in places that made a lot of sense for helping the workforce? And we actually found that they were not necessarily located in places that were really helpful for access to things like drug treatment centers or workforce development facilities. So that's all really wonderful background and early data insights that was brought back to the team to then have that conversation. What's the next step? And when we came back to the commission and to some of the other stakeholders and talked about that, what they decided was it would be really useful if it would be possible to knit together the data in such a way that it can tell us something about how attractive our region is, the different localities and geographies in our region, to singles and to families. So we did just that. We created what we call composite indicators, and I'm not going to go into the details of how those were created, but if you remember that we have that data science framework at the center of this process, that the statistical methods that were used, were rigorous and vetted and reviewed. And then we were able to come back with these composite indicators that have components around transportation, housing, and the community. And if you look at the two pictures on the right, what you'll see, and the different areas are the different magisterial districts and other neighborhood type boundaries that were important in this region. And you'll see that they don't look the same. What's attractive to singles is not the same as what's attractive to families. So this information, the commission and stakeholders in the community were able to use, and we can go to the next slide, to create some policy actions. That led to reviewing and looking at their regional transit and making some changes, looking very carefully at housing and how to rehabilitate housing and really understand type of housing in different areas that would be attractive to different folks. And then also policy actions around just improving the quality of the community in different places. And so now they continue to use their data and to look at how these policy actions are playing out, again, towards trying to continually improve the workforce situation across the region. And Mike, it's back to you. Mike, you're muted.
I said some great things too, by the way. I just wanted to make a couple of observations based upon that, the example you just gave, Sally. And it's, sometimes people think that when we're dealing with data, it's like it's black or white. The data says one thing and that's all it says, where I think you can see that there's a lot of adaptability and flexibility and creativity that can come into play with respect to how you pull that data together. And as you said, Sally, you weren't expecting to do these indices or these indicators, but that's, that was the need that emerged from the community that you said, well, we can attempt to accommodate that need through our data science framework. So data science is not rigid. It can be certainly flexible and you can do a lot of creative things with it. And the other thing is that, it's, when the data sets that we had provided prior to this, typically we just provide county level data. Whereas with this process, you can also get down beyond that into census district and neighborhoods, et cetera. And that really, to me, that really has a lot more implications for strategies to help address problems versus just at the county level. So I just wanted to make those two observations. Real quick, let's talk about Marshalltown, Iowa. And back in 2018, the mayor of Marshalltown indicated that transportation was a very critical need facing Marshalltown. It had been over a decade since the last city transit plan. And as I'll show you, there were a couple of population demographic changes that they felt, they needed to relook at that transit plan to say, how do we best improve that to accommodate these changing demographics. And you can see there, it's a town, if you can go back once, I'm sorry, a town of about 27,000, again, sort of in the middle of the state. And if you go to the next slide, one of the big things that they noticed, well, two things they noticed based on this slide, is that number one, the population of the Hispanic population had increased tremendously from, as you can see there, in 2000, it was about 12.6%. And currently it's almost 30%. And part of the reason for that is there's a food or meat processing plant, I guess, in town, and they employ a lot of Hispanics and Latinos. One of the other things that they found was that in that upper graph there was that people were moving farther away from their jobs. And that, they had to travel more, and that perhaps was a result of maybe the lack of affordable housing, or maybe mid-range housing, but people were living further from their jobs. And then some other additional information that they found was that they found the population was indeed getting younger. There was a need for childcare was increasing, and there were other demands on community services that they thought somehow retaking a look at their transportation system, especially their bus system, would prove beneficial. And given these things, the assumption, or what they thought, was that with these population changes was that the schedule for buses and the ridership would increase. Well, what they found when they actually looked at the data was the ridership information was decreasing for the public transportation, the bus system. And in addition to that, they found that there were an increasing number of complaints saying that the transit system was not very convenient, and it took too long to get from point A to point B. So again, what they assumed was going on really wasn't the case when they began looking at the data. Well, at this point, they brought in Iowa State's Cooperative Extension people, from some professionals as well as researchers from the institution. No, you can go back, sorry. Thank you. And they decided to take this sort of CLD3 approach to this. In fact, Sallie, you and I were at that initial meeting, weren't we? It was a very, very cold January day that we were in Marshalltown, Iowa for a very informative meeting. And basically, they said, well, can this team, can this CLD3 process, help us by accessing other forms of data and, really giving a more informed data-driven approach to this. And of course, the team worked with them. They pulled up some administrative data, some housing data, street map data, ridership data for this the transit authority, and they were allowed to do, or they did some spatial analysis, on the accessibility of bus stops, and then also, the location of sidewalks and street networks, especially with respect to some of the vulnerable populations. And so they could overlay, they could take the routes for the bus, they could overlay some of this other demographic information to see, is it a good mesh? Are those bus stops essentially in the right locations? And what they found was essentially that they weren't. Then in particular, as you can see there, the elderly and minority citizens were not being well served with the current bus routes. So what they did was they utilized that information, and they really did were able to reorganize that and actually increase the ridership by 11%. Now, let me just go back and say, I thought was a real interesting part of the example, is that when those discussions were taking place with this spatial data, the city people, the city managers and the city leadership they sort of knew that. They sort of knew that, well, maybe they aren't in the best locations because they're familiar with the city, they're familiar with the bus routes, they had a sense that, things weren't quite right, but it was all anecdotal information. And it wasn't until they brought forward this very systematic look at the information, this very informed, data-driven results, that the city council actually decided to make changes. And that's when they changed the bus routes and again, increased the increased the ridership by 11%. And as a result of that, if you go to the next slide, as a result of that outcome, they were able to secure additional funding from ARP and the Iowa League of Cities. Again, working with the CLD3 team, they developed a data-driven dashboard that is now on their city or their town website. And it, again, allows, data to inform other decisions about other critical issues within Marshalltown. And then icing on the cake, next slide, last slide, they actually received a national and state award. They received the Federal Transit Authority Award of Excellence, as well as the Iowa Transit Authority Award of Excellence for being the highest percentage increase in ridership among, maybe they did read when they were riding, among rural transit providers, 11%. And they also received, they won a regional and a national award from the National Association of Community Development Professionals, which is a group of extension people who deal with community development action around the country. And just lastly, as one person said, the community members won because their city was able to make changes that helped everyday people meet their needs a little bit better. And really, that's what this process is about. It's about helping people meet needs and about addressing issues and improving things for people within our community. So, Sallie, do you want to add anything to that?
So I don't think I need to add anything to that example. I just sort of wanted to just add something generally. So one of the things that that we have found through this work and through trying to roll out community learning through data-driven discovery is that we're able to take a community-based approach to thinking about really hard concepts like advancing economic mobility that's frequently thought of just at an individual level, but we're able to take a look at this at a community level and really trying to engage at this level of moving and advancing communities forward is what we're really excited about. And we're thrilled that we're able to, at least I'm thrilled that I'm able to collaborate and partner with Mike and with others in Cooperative Extension system, because it's something that Lindsay said to me one day. She said, it's a gift to be able to have this deep and rich network that's been around for 150 years that we're able to work with and actually try to advance data science and data insights to support communities across the country.
I want to say one other thing, and I want to really commend Sallie because, as Sallie mentioned, when we first got together, she was here at Virginia Tech, which is the land grant, the 1862 land grant institution in Virginia. And we began working together. And then unfortunately, but fortunately for her, she moved their operations to the University of Virginia, but we have still stayed connected. Sallie is committed to Cooperative Extension, which I certainly appreciate, and I'm sure you all do too. And so now I refer to them as our collaborating partner with respect to, they're not a land grant, but they're a collaborating land grant partner. And again, appreciate you continuing to be involved with Extension throughout this whole process, Sallie, really do.
Thank you. We won't stop till it's across the country.
Here you go.
Mike, there is a question in the chat. Looking at the Marshalltown project, out of curiosity, with 11% increase in ridership, how much did the budget for service increase? Or was there a correlation?
That I don't know, Sallie. I don't know if you know any information about that. I really don't know that.
No, I don't. And I don't know if any of our Iowa colleagues are on and could put an answer to that in the chat. I do not know, but we can find out.
Yeah, so we can explore that information, and that would be a great question for Dr. Castorius, who will be joining us next week to talk about the Community Capitals Economic Mobility Framework. So, other questions? So the question is, in the context of typical extension work, how do you see local educators accessing better different data as they do community needs assessments or situational analysis?
That's just a perfect question, and a perfect question to encourage people to come back next week. So one of the things that that we work hard on is, again, this sort of documentation of what we do and trying to pull together, and we're creating data infrastructure resources that if we find something useful for one problem, that we try to figure out how can we make it accessible to other communities and other cooperative extension colleagues and educators for their problems. And we're just continually building up this base of information. And it should hopefully make doing needs assessment and situation analysis a lot easier, and something that you do, every month instead of maybe once a year or once every 5 years. It's something that you're doing continuously. That's that continuous learning process of the CLD3 process that we try to emphasize.
I think that, when I first got involved in this, I had this vision of maybe our extension agents, people at the local level, would become data scientists, and that really is probably an unrealistic expectation. But we can certainly build the tools for them, which I think what we're trying to do. And Sallie, I don't know, you may want to spend just a minute or two talking about the data science for the public good, which is one way to operationalize the CLD3 process that we actually did in the 3 states, in Iowa, Oregon, and Virginia. We actually did projects. We did 8 projects here in Virginia this summer using this data science for the public good process. So we continue need to look for tools. We need to help our people understand the value of this, and then look for tools to help them with that data side of it. Sallie, do you want to say anything about the data science?
Yeah, what I would add is part of our vision, and I think I might have mentioned it at the very beginning, is that what we're trying to accomplish is to have data science reach back for the people in the field. So just as there's reach back in animal husbandry or food and nutrition and other areas that Cooperative Extension routinely works, we're also trying to mobilize colleagues at the university so that there's an interest in a data science reach back, so that there are people like, my folks that are colleagues at Virginia Tech and Iowa State and Oregon State that worked with us during the summer projects, that are just available and interested because it matches up with some of their own research and interests to be working with you on these problem areas. We don't envision that in the next short period of time that cooperative extension professionals will become data scientists. I think they're going to inch and move ever in that direction, just like, everyone else right now. But this data science reach back provides the support to be able to work these problems. And as Mike said, we used our experiential learning summer programs this past year and actually executed 14 problems. We have a website that we can put in the chat. I'll pull it up in a second, that you can take a look at the projects that were done, and they're still going on because it's a continuous process. It doesn't just stop. And we are looking for other mechanisms to do that, and maybe even influencing the Farm Bill next time around that would put more sustainable resources in there for having this kind of partnership and access.
There are two more questions in the question and answer area that really connect into the future sessions that are already planned. So the first one, how do you raise awareness and address the white race bias inherent in the data and process? And then the second question, will a future webinar session go into further detail on creating data maps? If not, where can we learn more about that?
So the first one about biases, that's why ethics discussions need to be ever present in the process. So you really need to be thinking carefully, because again, a lot of what we're doing is using existing data. Our strategy is to take advantage of data that exists, kind of wring all the information we can out of that, and let that guide where there might be gaps in understanding, and that would guide new data collection rather than starting every problem with a survey. So, but you have to be extremely careful, and you have to scrutinize that information. We do a lot of exploratory data analysis to try to understand and see what that spread looks like, what issues might be with that data. The data wrangling is a very serious component of all of this. But the team, you can't just leave that to me and to the other data scientists to do. You have to be able to bring this information back to the team, who has to weigh in about, does it look weird to them? What do they know? We're working with people who are from these communities. They know something about their community, and the data needs to rack and stack their own intuitions.
Sort of a context validity perspective too, when you're working with those, as you said, Sally, when you're working with local community stakeholders, that they can chime in on that as well. There was a second question, Sally. Future webinar sessions going into detail on creating data.
So I think that in the data discovery session, Mike, you guys will be doing a little bit of data maps. But Lindsay, that actually could be a really good topic for another session. We use this process of drawing these, pictures routinely and thinking about, and creating these data maps. And it's probably worthwhile to think about a session around that.
Sounds good. I think too, as we continue to develop the online self-paced modules, these can be topics that we add in and can explore in more detail to provide cooperative extension professionals the resources they need to be successful in partnership with communities. So. Yeah. And there is a question too about the webinars being recorded. Yes, they're being recorded, and we will make them available on the website that's in the link, and then also on Connect Extension through e-extension, and we'll have them as well on our OSU website where the registration was listed. So we've made a landing page there too. So we are nearing down our time. I want to thank our guests, our special guests, Dr. Sallie Keller and Dr. Mike Lambur, for joining us and giving us an overview of the process of community learning for data-driven discovery and wonderful examples to see what this means in action. And so this is just the beginning. Next week, we are going to be looking at Community Capital's Economic Mobility Framework. And again, we will be recording all of these sessions and making other resources and materials available along the way. Inspire and encourage your partners, collaborators, and extension professionals professional colleagues to join us next week. So thank you and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.